Chris Marek's attempt to build his own empire just handed Matt Roloff the ultimate weapon to destroy Amy's new marriage. For years, fans have watched an uneasy truce form between the Roloff men, a fragile peace held together for the sake of the cameras and the family legacy. But according to explosive new insider theories and reports coming out of Hillsborough, that peace has been shattered by a financial catastrophe that has been kept completely off-screen until now. We are looking at a scenario where ambition didn't just exceed ability, but where a secret alliance between the current husband and ex-husband has resulted in a $250,000 black hole. This isn't just about money, it is about humiliation. It is about control. And most importantly, it is about Amy Roloff finding out that the two men in her life were conspiring behind her back in a venture that has gone historically wrong. Picture the tension of a split screen. Chris on one side looking defeated, Matt on the other looking vindicated, and Amy caught in the crossfire of a deal she never signed up for. The rumors suggest Chris took a massive six-figure loan from Matt to build an exclusive luxury glamping destination near the farm. And now that dream is crumbling into a nightmare of debt and deception. Before we unzip the tent on this disaster and expose the financial ruin threatening to tear the family apart, you need to join our squad. If you want to stay ahead of the curve with the deepest dives, the darkest theories, and the most exclusive reality TV analysis that the networks don't want you to hear, you need to hit that like button right now. Crush that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. We are peeling back the layers that the editors try to hide, and you do not want to be left in the dark. Now, let's get into the $250,000 mistake that could cost Chris everything. To understand the magnitude of this alleged betrayal, we have to look at the psychology of Chris Marek. Since marrying Amy, Chris has been the steady hand, the calm presence, the real estate agent who knows his way around a contract. But insider reports suggest that beneath that calm exterior, Chris has been harboring a burning desire to prove he isn't just a supporting character in the Roloff story. He wanted to be a mogul. He wanted a legacy piece. The theory circulating among those close to the Oregon real estate scene is that Chris saw a golden opportunity that no one else was capitalizing on. He looked at the massive influx of tourists, the die-hard fans who travel thousands of miles just to stand near the pumpkin patch, and he saw a gap in the market. Hotels in the area are standard, but the Roloff brand is about experience. It is about the rustic, the outdoors, the farm life. Chris envisioned a high-end, exclusive glamping destination. We are talking about sleeping bags on the dirt. We are talking about safari-style canvas structures on raised mahogany platforms, king-sized beds with Egyptian cotton sheets, running water, electricity, and private fire pits. He wanted to create an immersive experience where fans could pay a premium, rumors say up to $500 a night, to sleep under the same stars as the Roloff family. It was, on paper, a brilliant business move. It was the kind of idea that generates passive income for decades. But there was one massive hurdle standing in his way: land and capital. Chris has his own money, certainly, but to build at the level of luxury he envisioned, to create a resort-style enclave that would pass code and attract the high-end clientele he wanted, he needed a significant cash infusion, and he needed the right location. This is where the story takes a dark turn into secrecy. Instead of going to a bank, where interest rates are high and the vetting process is slow, or going to Amy, who would likely be skeptical of risking their retirement nest egg on a hospitality venture, sources suggest Chris made the fateful decision to approach the one person who loves a risky construction project more than anyone else: Matt Roloff. This is the betrayal that creates the foundation for the disaster. By approaching Matt, Chris wasn't just asking for money. He was inviting Amy's ex-husband into their financial bedroom. The theory is that Chris pitched this to Matt not just as an investment, but as a partnership that would drive traffic to the farm during the off-season. Matt, always the businessman and always looking for ways to expand the empire without doing the heavy lifting himself, allegedly saw an opportunity to keep Chris under his thumb while potentially making a massive profit. The initial loan was reportedly staggering. We are hearing whispers of a first tranche of $150,000. This money was meant to secure the materials, the high-end canvas, the plumbing infrastructure, and the permits. But the condition of the loan is what makes this so volatile. Reports imply that Matt attached brutal strings to this money. If the project failed or if payments were missed, Matt wouldn't just get his money back. He would gain controlling interest in the assets Chris was purchasing. Essentially, Chris signed a deal with the devil, betting on his own competence to pull this off before Amy ever found out the details. He wanted to present it to her as a finished, profit-generating surprise. Look what I built for us moment. He wanted to be the hero who secured their financial future independent of the show. Instead, he was digging a hole. The setup of the glamping site was supposed to be situated on a parcel of land adjacent to the farm, a blurry line where the Roloff property ends and the neighboring lots begin. This proximity was key. It allowed Chris to market it as part of the Roloff experience without technically being on the big house property. Chris spent weeks meeting with designers, looking at catalogs of luxury tents imported from South Africa, and dreaming of the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He was holding secret meetings with Matt, likely under the guise of hanging out or discussing generic real estate trends, while in reality, they were reviewing blueprints and disbursement schedules. Imagine the scene. Chris and Matt huddled over architectural drawings in the barn, Matt pointing out potential pitfalls with his trademark skepticism, and Chris nodding, eager to prove he could handle the big league construction projects just like Matt could. It fed Matt's ego to be the financier, the Don of the family, dispensing cash and wisdom. It fed Chris's ego to feel like a partner rather than a participant. But the complexity of building a luxury glamping site is deceptive. It looks like just setting up tents, but it is actually commercial development. You need septic systems capable of handling turnover. You need liability insurance. You need to grade the land so the tents don't flood. You need power lines buried so they don't ruin the aesthetic. Chris, for all his real estate knowledge, is not a general contractor. He is not a project manager. He sells finished homes. He doesn't build infrastructure from scratch. This hubris, this belief that he could simply hire a crew and make it happen, was the first crack in the foundation. The theory suggests that Matt knew this was harder than it looked. Matt has spent decades battling county codes and inspectors. There is a cynical speculation that Matt perhaps knew Chris would struggle, that he set him up with enough rope to hang himself, knowing that eventually Chris would have to come crawling back for help, thereby cementing Matt's dominance over the new husband. As the materials began to arrive, the secrecy became harder to maintain. Huge pallets of lumber, industrial-grade canvas, and bathroom fixtures had to be stored somewhere. Chris was playing a dangerous game of hide-and-seek with Amy, deflecting questions about where he was going during the day or why he was on the phone so much. He was leveraged. He had taken the first massive chunk of cash from Matt, and the clock was ticking to get the site operational before the summer season. The pressure was mounting. He needed this to be perfect. He needed those king-size beds to look like a 5-star hotel. He needed the landscaping to be immaculate. The vision was grand. Safari in Hillsboro. A taste of the Serengeti in Oregon. But visions don't pay the bills, and visions don't pour concrete. The financial structure of the deal meant that Chris was personally liable. This wasn't an LLC that could just declare bankruptcy and walk away. If the insider rumors are true, Chris put his own personal credit and assets on the line to secure the deal with Matt. It was a gamble on himself. He truly believed he could pull off the construction for the initial budget. He calculated the cost of lumber before the market fluctuated. He estimated labor costs based on best-case scenarios. He didn't factor in the chaos factor that always seems to surround projects near the farm. He was optimistic, perhaps naively so, driven by the desire to stand equal to Matt Roloff as a builder and a visionary. He wanted Amy to look at him with that same awe she once held for Matt's creations, but without the toxicity. He wanted to give her the castle without the drama. But by taking the money from the source of the drama, he ensured that the toxicity was baked into the project from day one. The stage was set, the money was transferred, the secret pact was sealed. And Chris Marek stood on the edge of the property, looking at an empty field, believing he was about to build a gold mine, completely unaware that he was breaking ground on his own financial grave. The collapse of the dream didn't happen all at once. It happened in a slow, agonizing slide into chaos that began with a single, fatal error in judgment. With the pressure mounting to maximize the budget and get the site operational before the prime tourist season hit, reports indicate that Chris Marek made a decision that would haunt him. Instead of hiring a licensed, bonded, and expensive construction firm, the kind Matt Roloff would have begrudgingly approved of, Chris allegedly tried to cut a corner. The theory is that Chris, desperate to prove he could manage the finances better than the Roloffs, hired a contractor based on a friend of a friend recommendation. This was a contractor who promised the world. He promised he could source the exotic hardwoods for half the price. He promised he could install the complex plumbing systems for the luxury tents without the usual red tape. He promised a turnkey operation in 6 weeks. It was a bid that came in significantly lower than the industry standard, and for a savvy real estate agent like Chris, that should have been the ultimate red flag. But blinded by the desire to deliver a massive return on investment and impressed by the contractor's smooth talking, Chris handed over the keys to the kingdom. The work began with a flurry of activity that looked promising from the road. Excavators were moving dirt, frames were going up, and Chris was sending updated photos to Matt that seemed to show progress. But inside the site, a disaster was brewing. According to sources familiar with local building codes, the problem started with the foundation. The luxury tents required specific, reinforced platforms to handle the Oregon mud and the weight of the furniture. The contractor, however, allegedly used substandard concrete mixes and failed to properly grade the drainage. Then came the materials. The high-end safari-grade canvas that Chris had ordered? Rumors suggest that when the shipments arrived, they were swapped out or delayed, replaced by inferior, thinner synthetic materials that looked good from a distance but would never withstand a Pacific Northwest storm. Chris was visiting the site, but he didn't have the trained eye to spot the structural corners being cut. He saw walls going up. He didn't see the electrical wiring that was being installed without proper grounding. He didn't see the septic lines that were being laid too shallow. He was managing the vision, not the nuts and bolts, and the contractor was playing him for a fool. The twist in this knife came about 4 weeks into the project. The requests for advance payments started coming in. The contractor claimed material costs had spiked. He claimed he needed cash to secure specialized labor. Chris, anxious to keep the momentum going and terrified of missing the deadline, reportedly dipped into the funds Matt had loaned him, signing checks without verifying the work. He was bleeding cash. The initial $150,000 was evaporating at a terrifying rate. Then the silence started. Workers stopped showing up. The site grew quiet. When Chris drove out to inspect the progress one rainy Tuesday, he found a ghost town. No crew, no heavy machinery. And worst of all, the stockpiles of expensive lumber and fixtures that had been delivered the week before were gone. The site had been stripped. The contractor wasn't answering his phone. His email bounced back. It was the classic construction grift. And Chris Marek, the man who wanted to prove he was a business titan, had been taken for a ride. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was standing in the mud, looking at half-finished skeletons of tents that were already sagging, realizing that the money, Matt's money, was gone. He had nothing to show for it but a muddy field and a potential lawsuit. The panic that set in must have been suffocating. He couldn't go to the police without creating a public scandal that would alert Amy. He couldn't go to Amy because that would mean admitting he had gone behind her back to her ex-husband. He was trapped in a vice of his own making. The smart move would have been to cut his losses, confess, and face the music. But fear makes people do irrational things. Instead of folding, Chris decided to double down. He convinced himself that if he could just get more money, he could hire a legitimate crew to fix the mess, finish the project, and generate enough revenue to pay Matt back before anyone noticed the hiccup. It was the gambler's fallacy. Just one more hand to win it all back. So, with his pride swallowed and his hands shaking, Chris went back to Matt. The second meeting was vastly different from the first. If the first meeting was a partnership, this was a shakedown. Insider theory suggests that Matt Roloff, sitting in his office surrounded by his own successful projects, saw right through Chris. He likely knew something had gone wrong, but perhaps not the extent of it. When Chris confessed that he needed more capital, another $100,000, Matt's demeanor shifted from investor to shark. The rumors paint a picture of a tense negotiation where Matt realized he had Chris completely cornered. He allegedly demanded to know why the first tranche was gone so quickly. Chris, trying to save face, likely spun a story about unforeseen supply chain issues rather than admitting he had been scammed. Matt, sensing blood in the water, agreed to the second loan, bringing the total debt to a staggering $250,000. But the terms were reportedly draconian. This wasn't just a loan anymore, it was a leash. If Chris didn't pay this back with interest by a specific date, reports say Matt would have the right to garner Chris's personal real estate commissions. Matt was effectively buying ownership of Chris's financial future. Armed with a second infusion of cash, Chris tried to salvage the Titanic. He hired a new crew, legitimate this time, to come in and assess the damage. But this is where the reality of construction hit him. The new contractors took one look at the work the scammer had done and gave Chris the news he dreaded most. It all had to be torn down. The foundations were unsafe, the framing was non-compliant, the electrical was a fire hazard. You can't build a palace on a swamp. The $100,000 from the second loan wasn't going to build the resort, it was going to be spent just clearing the debris of the first failure. The math didn't work. The hole was too deep. Chris started pouring the new money into demolition and remediation, watching the bank account drain day by day, knowing that he was barely back to square one. The timeline for opening passed. The summer bookings he had hoped for were impossible. The glamping at the farm project was dead in the water, a half-demolished eyesore hidden behind the trees. The climax of this secret tragedy exploded when Matt decided to make an unscheduled site visit. Up until this point, Matt had been content to let Chris manage the project, trusting that his investment was secure. But as the weeks dragged on with no grand opening and vague excuses from Chris, Matt's patience snapped. He drove his mule out to the neighboring parcel, expecting to see a near-finished luxury retreat. What he found was a disaster zone. He saw the torn-up ground, the piles of scrapped materials, and the complete lack of progress. The realization that his $250,000 had effectively been incinerated sent Matt into a rage that is rarely seen, even on the show. He wasn't just angry about the money, he was insulted. He felt he had been lied to, manipulated, and played by the man who replaced him. Chris was on site when Matt pulled up. Witnesses, likely crew members or neighbors within earshot, report a confrontation that escalated instantly. This wasn't a passive-aggressive discussion, this was a screaming match. Matt allegedly tore into Chris, accusing him of incompetence, of lying, of effectively stealing the money through sheer stupidity. He demanded to see the books. He demanded to know where the contractor was. Chris, backed into a corner and exhausted from weeks of stress, finally snapped back. He reportedly shouted that Matt's pressure was what caused the rush, that Matt wanted him to fail. The air was thick with accusations. "You came to me," Matt reportedly screamed, his voice echoing off the remaining skeleton frames of the tents. "You begged me for this. I didn't ask you to build this disaster." The volatility of the moment cannot be overstated. We're talking about two men who have been engaged in a silent alpha male contest for years, finally letting the mask slip. Chris, usually the pacifist, was red-faced, defending his integrity while standing amidst the ruins of his failure. Matt, feeling the sting of a bad investment and the disrespect of being misled, was relentless. It got so heated that reports suggest a producer or a member of the farm's security team who happened to be nearby had to physically step in, not to break up a fistfight, but to separate them before it crossed that line. They were chest to chest, or as close as the height difference allowed, screaming over the roar of the wind. Matt threatened legal action. He threatened to go straight to Amy and tell her everything immediately. He threatened to put a lien on Chris's truck, his house, everything he owned. For Chris, this was the absolute rock bottom. The project was dead. The money, $250,000 of Matt Roloff's cash, was gone, wasted on a scammer and the subsequent cleanup. He had no asset to sell to recoup the loss. He had no revenue stream coming in. And now he had an enraged Matt Roloff holding a promissory note that could ruin him financially. The alliance was over. The secret was about to come out, and the most terrifying part for Chris wasn't Matt's anger. It was the realization that he now had to go home to Amy, the woman who had trusted him to be different than Matt, and explain that he was $250,000 in debt to her ex-husband because of a secret scheme that had blown up in his face. The betrayal was absolute. He had leveraged their peace for a business deal, and he had lost. The silence that followed the screaming match was heavy with the weight of impending doom. Matt drove off in a cloud of dust, leaving Chris standing alone in the wreckage of his empire, knowing that the real storm was just about to hit. The glamping disaster was no longer a construction problem. It was a marital nuclear bomb, and the countdown had just hit 0. The drive back to the big house after that screaming match with Matt Roloff must have been the longest drive of Chris Marek's life. He wasn't just returning home to his wife, he was returning to the scene of the crime, carrying a secret that was now too big to hide. The project was dead, the money was incinerated, and Matt Roloff, the one man Amy specifically wanted out of her financial life, was now effectively their creditor. When Chris walked through the door, sources say the look on his face told Amy everything she needed to know. The confession that followed wasn't just about a failed business venture. It was about a fundamental breach of the marital contract. Chris had to sit Amy down at their kitchen table, surrounded by the life they built together, and admit that he had gone behind her back to the very person she had spent years trying to disentangle herself from. He had to tell her that he owed her ex-husband $250,000. The reaction, according to those close to the situation, was not immediate anger, but a profound, shattering disappointment. Amy Roloff has spent the last decade fighting for her independence. She fought to get her fair share of the farm. She fought to establish her own identity separate from the Roloff empire. She fought to find a love that was respectful and equal. And now, in one stroke of ego-driven madness, Chris had undone all of that work. He had reinvited Matt into their marriage. The tragedy here isn't just the debt, it is the leverage. By owing Matt money, Chris has handed Matt a level of control over their household that Amy thought she had escaped forever. Matt is no longer just the ex-husband. He is the banker. He is the landlord of their peace of mind. The bitter irony of this situation is almost Shakespearean. We have to talk about the settlement money. Fans of the show know the emotional toll it took on Amy to negotiate her buyout from the farm. That money wasn't just cash. It was her freedom. It was her nest egg, her security, the tangible proof of her years of labor raising those kids and building that brand. Now, Amy faces the ultimate nightmare scenario. To save Chris from financial ruin, to prevent Matt from seizing Chris's assets or dragging them through a humiliating public lawsuit, Amy may have to dip into her own settlement money to pay Matt back. Think about the cruelty of that circle. The money Matt paid Amy for her share of the farm might simply flow right back into Matt's pocket to cover Chris's mistake. It is a financial loop that leaves Matt with the land, the money, and the power, while Amy is left with a depleted savings account and a husband who betrayed her trust. The fallout has reportedly turned the Roloff dynamic into a Cold War. Insiders suggest that Matt is not making this easy. He isn't writing off the debt as a family loss. He is a businessman, and he feels scorned. There are whispers that Matt is demanding a strict repayment schedule, potentially with interest, treating Chris not like a family member, but like a delinquent tenant. This puts Amy in an impossible position. Does she stand by her husband and bail him out, effectively paying for his lie? Or does she let Chris drown in the debt he created, which would almost certainly destroy their marriage? The stress is palpable. We are seeing a side of Amy that is fearful and weary. She is looking at a retirement that is suddenly much less secure than it was 6 months ago. The trips, the relaxation, the second act, all of that is now overshadowed by the looming specter of this massive debt to Matt. And what about the kids? The ripple effects of this glamping disaster are spreading to Zach and Tori. They have their own contentious relationship with Matt, largely over the farm negotiations. If the rumors are true and they find out that Chris, who was supposed to be the neutral party, was secretly colluding with Matt on a luxury project, it destroys Chris's credibility as the safe grandfather figure. It validates every paranoia Zach has had about his father's manipulation. It makes Chris look like he was trying to cash in on the family name, just like everyone else. The family gatherings, already tense, are now potential minefields. How can they sit around a Thanksgiving table knowing that one man at the table owes the other man a fortune and the woman in the middle is paying the price? The production of the show itself is now complicated by this reality. For years, the producers have looked for storylines. Well, they just got the biggest storyline in the history of the franchise, but it is one that the family might be desperate to keep off camera. However, the dark truth is that they might need the show now more than ever. If Chris owes Matt $250,000, and if the glamping site is a total loss, the steady paycheck from TLC becomes a lifeline they cannot afford to cut. They are trapped in the reality TV machine. They have to keep filming, keep opening up their lives, and keep interacting with Matt because they need the money to pay him back. It is a vicious cycle of dependency that Matt Roloff likely understands all too well. As the dust settles on the collapsed tents and the broken promises, we are left with a portrait of a marriage under siege. Marek wanted to be a hero. He wanted to be a tycoon. Instead, he proved to be human, fallible, and susceptible to the same hubris that has plagued the Roloff men for years. He flew too close to the sun, and the wax on his wings melted. But it is Amy who is left to pick up the feathers. She is the one who has to look Matt in the eye at the next drop-off and know that he knows he won. She is the one who has to look at her bank statement and see the hole where her security used to be. The glamping project was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place of rest. Instead, it became a monument to secrecy and failure. So, where do we go from here? The site is abandoned, likely to be reclaimed by the Oregon moss and rain. The contractor who scammed Chris is in the wind, likely targeting the next dreamer with a checkbook. But the debt remains. The betrayal remains. And the question that every fan needs to ask themselves is this: what would you do? If you were Amy, standing at that crossroads, looking at the man you promised to love and cherish, knowing he risked everything behind your back, would you write the check? Would you hand over your hard-earned freedom money to the ex-husband who tormented you for years just to save your new husband's pride? Or would you let Chris face the consequences alone, even if it meant the end of the marriage? This isn't just reality TV drama anymore. This is real life with real stakes. This is about the price of loyalty and the cost of ambition. Amy Roloff is facing the hardest decision of her life, and the cameras are rolling. Matt Roloff is waiting for his money, and Marek is waiting to see if he still has a wife when the check clears. We will be tracking this story aggressively. As soon as court documents are filed or settlement details leak, you will hear it here first. We are digging into the county records to find the permits and the liens. We are talking to the neighbors who saw the construction crews vanish. This story is far from over.